All right, there's lots of corners when you're riding, and every corner is going to require something a little different. And like my way of thinking of it is, the faster the corner is, the less you want to be on your front brake through the corner. If you got to turn a real tight radius and you got to make a quick 180 and there's a good little rut there and you need to shrink down the wheelbase of your bike, that's when you want to use the front brake further into the corner. But with the way this corner is, it looks like a tight corner, but this one, I'm actually going to get off my front brake way back there and utilize my rear brake through this corner. So I'm going to go do it a couple times and then I'll show you a different kind of corner where the front brake's going to be more important.
Okay, so here I'm just gonna break down the technique I'm using. Front and rear to slow me down as I start to lean in beyond about 10 to 20% or degrees. I lay off the front brake and I just control the rear till right before the apex. That's my standard way of doing most of the corners on the track.
Okay, now I'm gonna utilize a different technique, which a lot of people get caught up with, is using a lot of front brake in a fast corner. Using a lot of front brake in a fast corner and the whole riding the front brake thing does not work in fast corners. You gotta just let it go. So I'm gonna do it again and I'm gonna use front brake only when I start leaning in instead of my rear brake. You can see the speed difference.
All right, so here it's, everything looks the same, but where I really feel that it robs my time is actually on corner entry. So you can see here, I'm not as laid over on approach to the corner. Everything here looks the same, probably not as much lean angle, but right about here, my bike always wants to kind of stand up and ride out. And that is what I believe is from the rebound of the forks. I can feel it. When I use the front brake too far into a corner, the rebound of the forks is really aggressive and hard to control. All right, so what I've done here is I've overlaid each one, bottom one being the rear brake, top one being the front brake, and you can see it even in real time, the difference. Okay, so I lined them up evenly. Okay, as I'm approaching the corner, everything's about the same and a little more entrance speed with the bottom one. I got my foot on the rear brake in the bottom, foot on the front brake in the top. And you can see I'm already bike lengths in front of myself. So if you have 15 corners and you can gain a bike length in every corner, that'll put you a straightaway or so ahead of somebody. So let's watch it again. Let's see what the difference is here. Okay, see how in the bottom one, my rear end is not following my front. So I'm better able to set up at a better lean angle before the corner. The problem is when you get off the rear and you're only applying front brake, that rear wheel has to follow the front wheel and it makes it very hard to negotiate the corner.
All right, so as you can see, the one I came through with my foot on the rear brake with a light rear trail braking was a lot faster, a lot more lean. I was able to get on it quicker. The front brake, I have to be very careful because every application of that front brake, my front end goes up and down. And if I try to use it through a fast corner like this, I'm not going to be stable and carry momentum because my front end is going to be changing the attitude of my bike the whole time. So when you have a faster corner like this, ideally off of the brakes completely if you can, but your rear brake's actually going to be more beneficial than your front brake through a corner like this because you get too much up and down from the front end when you're using the front brake. It's just not as fast. All right, a corner like this right here, you have such a tight radius that if you try to use your rear brake, it's not a fast corner and it's not a sweeping corner. So what's gonna happen is if I use my rear brake, it's gonna wanna stand me up because to turn that tight radius, I have to put too much pressure on that rear brake and in turn stands me up. But if I use my rear and my front, and then I trail the front brake as I'm going through this corner, I'll be able to do this corner a lot more effectively. And what that's doing is by squatting my front end, it's shortening the radius of the tires or the bike, the wheelbase. It's shortening it by squatting the front end, and it allows the bike to turn tighter. So I would say this track has probably 15 corners. 2 out of the 15, I'm a little bit more on my front brake. 13 out of the 15, I'm either riding the rear brake or no brakes at all. So you got to kind of rethink. Everyone gets so infatuated with riding their front brake, and I see it time and time again where the front brake is what's slowing people down because they're abusing it and overusing it while they ride.
All right, like I said, we can't just blindly use the same technique for every corner. Every corner is going to require something different, and that's why you try everything out. So here I'm going to try to let go of the front brake and ride the rear brake like I was earlier. And you can see right there, there's a hard pause because I'm going too slow and I have to make too tight of a turn in this corner that I end up locking the rear wheel up, pausing my bike and standing myself up. And we'll take a look at the other method next. All right, so here I am here. I'm going to use the standard front brake drag technique. So as I'm braking hard for the corner, I stand up, front and rear brake. Now I'm off of the rear brake with my foot out, but you can see that finger on the front brake all the way till about 3/4 of the way through the corner. It allows me to keep my momentum and lean angle. So the opposite of what the other corner was. All right, so you can see here, I've tried to overlay them and even them out. And I'm not even sure which one is the front brake one, but I'll know when I go through. You can see here, okay, leg out on the bottom, that's the front brake one. And you can see on the top one, you see that pause, and look at the bottom one gain a front fender and then eventually a whole bike length on exit. And that was just keeping the roll, but this is the opposite technique using the front brake drag. So this is the challenging part about racing motocross is, you know, there is not one technique for every corner. I think that like street bike racing is a little more generalized, but you know, dirt bike racing, we have ruts, we have berms, we have dry dirt, we have hard dirt, we have ever-changing dirt. Sometimes you come around every lap and it's different. So what I think you really need to focus on is just using the correct technique for every application. And what I do is I really try to go out and just experiment with what works and what doesn't work. And that's why it's important to get your practice in. And then, you know, you got to be thinking when you're out there. So what I do when I'm training the kids or the adults is I have them explain to me, you know, how to do every corner. And usually they nail it. They know how to do every single corner, you know, the right application of brakes. Some will be no brakes. Some will be a light front brake drag, and when you're doing the front brake drag or even the rear brake, it's light pressure. It's not stomping on it. You don't go from hardly any brake to all brake. It's going to be a light drag, whether you're using the front or the rear, not a very heavy drag, because a heavy drag is going to stall you out and it's going to make the suspension bounce up and down on the front end. So, you know, figure out. And so the way I think about it is tight radius ruts, especially right-handers, those are going to be a front brake drag. You know, the more the corner opens up, the less you want to be playing with that front brake and maybe, you know, a little bit more on that rear brake. So yeah, analyze the corners and, you know, comment if you have any questions or, you know, you disagree, go ahead and put it in the comments there. But this is just, you know, 30 years of this is what the point I'm coming to here.